Well, the U.S. National Security Advisor has strongly criticized the previous administration for withdrawal from the 2015 accord that comes as a new round of talks between Iran and the P4+1 countries to revive the agreement ends in Vienna.
And getting that program back into the box through a return to mutual compliance with the JCPOA has proven more difficult over the course of this year than we would have liked to see. And we are paying the wages of the disastrous decision to leave the deal back in 2018. That being said, what is going well in unity with our greater alignment.
Sullivan's comments echoed those of the U.S. Secretary of State. Antony Blinken earlier admitted that abandoning JCPOA isolated the U.S., not Iran. Blinken said Washington's pullout from the accord was a disastrous mistake. He also admitted that a maximum pressure campaign against Iran only pushed the country to rebuild its nuclear program. The JCPOA was thrown into disarray after the U.S. unilaterally withdrew from the agreement and reimposed sanctions on Iran in 2018. In order to discuss that story further, I'm joined by Jason Unruhe, who is a political commentator, joining us from the Niagara Falls. Jason, thank you for joining Press TV. Excuse me. So what do you make of this, recent remark by the U.S. National Security Advisor?
I think it's a measure of frustration on his part that he even has to do any of this. None of this was necessary. None of this had to happen. Donald Trump and the cronies that served him abandoned the JCPOA merely for his own aesthetic, to make it look like he was going to be tough on Iran. He was going to make Iran bow to the U.S. empire, etc. I think this was one of the things that Trump was going to do as a power move to boost his image at the time, considering how bad it was. And then he carried out the attack, or had the U.S. military carry out the attack that killed Qasem Soleimani, and now the administration after him now has to clean up that mess. They have to come back and do all this renegotiation. They have to do all the efforts. They have to go to these talks. They have to pay people to go there and negotiate. And none of it was necessary. None of this had to happen. So I think that this, in a part, maybe the current administration lashing out at the previous administration for their actions in creating this mess. However, it doesn't absolve this current administration of the wrongdoing that they have done. They, of course, have stonewalled the negotiations on more than one occasion. All Iran has ever asked was to return to the original agreement, and that is something that the Biden administration seemed completely unwilling to do, and has stonewalled this entire thing. I think, as the previous story you mentioned with the European allies, about basically signing off on what it is that Iran wanted, these new concessions, ideas, what have you. I think it's a very clear message from the European allies that they too are tired of having to deal with this situation. They had to go through a whole deal of setting up an alternative payment system. I can't remember the name, Simtex or Centex or something like that, to deal with the U.S. pulling out of the agreement. And even then, most of the European allies themselves didn't even live up to their own agreements. So I think this is the European signatories' way of sending a message to the United States: okay, that's enough of this. Let's just get the deal done. Let things go back to normal. There is some trade that we would like to be doing with Iran at this time, but we're afraid of what you're going to do to us if we don't follow your sanctions, which you don't have any legal right to enforce on us or to demand of us whatsoever. So I think that this has been a terrible mess, and I think these particular statements were something to express frustration at this whole event, of which essentially was not necessary from the beginning.
Jason, thank you so much for joining us. That was Jason Unruhe, a political commentator, joining us from Niagara Falls, Ontario.